Hey guys, Brad and Hannah here. Today we're going to react to and watch a new Ben Shapiro video where he debunks criminal justice reform. Hannah, you excited?
I'm not excited. I'm already angry. I'm trying to stay calm and be open-minded, but criminal justice reform is my thing. I've worked on it for about 10 years. I was one of the leading voices on it. I have overturned numerous bad criminal justice laws. And beyond any other subject, I'm pretty in the weeds on this one.
Well, you're about to get debunked.
By the famous Ben Shapiro. I've heard he's a great debater, so let's see.
I will say, out of all the Daily Wire guys, he's definitely the one who I have the most respect for. He's very clearly a smart guy, but he's very much like a old school boomer conservative. And his takes on criminal justice are very boomery, as y'all are about to see. Let's tune in.
You've heard people on the left say that the biggest problem in the criminal justice system in America is mass incarceration, that we have sentences that are too long, that we have sentences that are disparate, that too many people are in jail, that the police are cracking down on black and brown Americans and throwing them in jail for no reason at all, devastating inner-city communities. In 2020, members of both political parties gravitated toward a catchphrase encapsulating many of these ideas.
Criminal justice reform.
Criminal justice reform.
Base
Criminal justice reform.
Criminal justice reform.
As Politico noted in April of that year, criminal justice reform is finally having a moment in U.S. politics. Until recent years, candidates usually competed to look tough on crime and paint their opponents as soft. But 2020 is different. "2020 was the year of Black Lives Matter. It was the year of defund the police. It was the year of ending the supposed school-to-prison pipeline. It was the year of George Floyd and Ava DuVernay and Kamala Harris."
Wait, what? Kamala Harris?
Kamala Harris is a criminal justice reform warrior now? News to me. What?
She literally locked people up for fun.
I have a whole article about how Kamala Harris is one of the biggest opponents and instruments of the criminal justice system. Oh my gosh. No. We don't blame her.
The whole defund the police thing. Did that actually happen? Or was that...
No.
It was a lot of talk, but...
Listen, I have so many issues when conservatives try to go after the defund movement because the vast majority of people I know on both the left and right did not claim the defund the police movement, thought it was a stupid slogan, thought it was fringy and weird, and that's not where most of the criminal justice reform movement's policies have ever focused. On top of that, nobody ever defunded the police. They're going to consistently try to say, oh, see, there's more violent crime over the past 2 years because police got defunded. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. There was only ever maybe, less than 5 departments that had any funding taken away. It was quickly reinstated. And actually, I've done some research that shows the police unions as a whole used the defund movement to actually come in and lobby for pay increases. So the vast majority of departments actually got an increase in funds. Yeah, we'll link that.
All right, let's keep it rolling.
It was also the year that saw the worst increase in murder rate in a century, the biggest since 1905, and maybe in history, rising by nearly a third.
Let me stop you.
The clearance rate on murders...
I gotta stop it. Okay. He's doing something I've seen done a lot, and for people who aren't familiar with how to read data, I gotta break this down for you. So, what you just saw him do is he said there was this huge increase in violence, the biggest increase since the early 1900s, right? He's trying to portray it as if violent crime is just going haywire right now. Our cities are overrun with it. You saw this massive spike in violent crime since 2020. We did see some types of crime have an increase throughout the pandemic, 2020, 2021 era. The only reason you could say that they had a historically high percentage increase, though, is because crime was already at a bottom historic low level before the pandemic, thanks in part, thanks mostly,
and he showed the change. He showed the relative statistic.
Yes. And so what you actually need to look at is, have we actually become more violent as a society? No. Compared to where violent crime rates were, even in the early 2000s, they have plummeted. And then you saw a bit of a spike in 2020-21, which can largely be attributed actually to lockdowns, to school closures, to economic uncertainty, to mental duress that people felt during this very stressful time. These are things that actually impact violence and crime.
That's what I was thinking. So what I was thinking is, it's not like criminal justice reform just started in 2021. It's been happening for at least a decade, yet you saw this uptick. I think that had a lot more to do with the big government response to the pandemic, where we took away people's jobs, locked them in their homes, closed their schools, isolated them from their friends, and put them in desperation and mental anguish, and then crime happened. I'm not shocked by that. It's terrible, but I'm also not gonna sit here and blame criminal justice reform for that.
And maybe in history, rising by nearly a third. The clearance rate on murders went down to just over 50%, so a lot of murderers got away with it.
That's not quite right.
None of this should have been surprising.
That's not quite right.
The basic tenets of criminal justice reform, that we are in an era of mass incarceration, that we must shorten prison sentences and get rid of bail, that the problem of criminality can be solved socially rather than with more cops, are a lie.
All right, I gotta pause it there for a hot sec, because he just said that the tenets of criminal justice reform, then he listed some things that I wouldn't really say are the tenets of it, but say that they are. Mass incarceration isn't like an opinion. It's not a take. It's like a fact that the U.S. has mass incarceration. You could argue that's a good thing, but I mean, we have, these are the statistics as of July 2021. We have almost 2.1 million prisoners. And that's actually more than China and India in absolute terms, even though they have way bigger populations than us. We have the most prisoners in the world per population. We've got like 5% of the world's population and over 20% of the world's prison population. Like, we do have mass incarceration. It's not an opinion or a lie. It's more just a fact.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he said a few things here that are already just incorrect. He said that, so first and foremost, the average homicide clearance rate has averaged about 60% at the national level for years. We don't do a very good job of solving violent crimes ever. It did not just all of a sudden fall. And I also think he's wrong on the 50% number. I checked the FBI. It appears to still be about 60% on average. Of course, like, you can go into specific counties or I guess, average it differently. But anyways, that's the actual average, and that's nothing new. And so that should actually be causing people to ask questions about how we do policing. If we're only averaging, solving, or clearing about 60% of homicides each year, that's really bad.
Seems like those should be the top concern.
Yeah, like that should be making you ask yourself, like, is there a problem with policing? Probably we're not doing things right, or it's structured poorly if this is the outcome, that they're not even clearing violent crimes. I also have an issue with how he presented criminal justice reform. He kind of just threw a bunch of buzzwords in there, but things like bail reform are excellent policies. And I want to be clear on this, because this is something people just do not understand. Right now, the way the system works is you typically have a cash money bail system. So if you're arrested for a crime, they're going to say, okay, we think you have about this much money, so therefore you have to pay X in order to be released and be free until time for your trial. For people who are poor and cannot make that payment, they often end up languishing in jail for weeks, losing their jobs. This creates an economic spiral that can actually lead to more crime down the road. We've seen people kill themselves waiting for trial, and it violates the Constitution's basic premise that you have a right to a speedy trial and you shouldn't be held until you're actually convicted. Right now, we don't base whether or not you get out on bail on your actual risk or the actual threat of you committing more violence. We just say, can you pay this amount? And then if you can, you get out. And if you can't, you're stuck in jail. Bail reform would say, we should probably look and see if this person is actually going to continue to be a danger to society. And if we evaluate that they are through a risk assessment, then you're not getting out until we can have a trial, and we're going to do that quickly and try to move things along more speedily. But if we determine that you're not an ongoing threat to society, then you are relinquished whether or not you have money to pay us. Okay? That's all bail reform is.
I think that cash bail is a seriously messed up system, because basically if you're rich, you don't have to stay in jail, but if you're poor, you do in many situations. That doesn't make sense. I will say it seems like some people are doing bail reform badly. Like, you'll see instances where somebody who clearly was violent was let go, and it's like, that shouldn't be. But the idea that bail reform is inherently bad because of that, I mean, no, I think it should just be specifically a question of, is this person a danger to the community or a serious flight risk? If they are, then they don't get bail, they don't get released. And if they aren't, then they do. Not how much money can they come up with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From 1935 to 1964, the United States enjoyed an unprecedented drop in the crime rate. Then it all collapsed. From 1970 to 1990, Americans were more likely to be victimized in a violent crime than to be injured in a car accident, by a long shot. As of 1990, 4 in 10 Americans said they were afraid to walk alone at night.
The war on drugs is focused on crack.
the crack epidemic had crippled major metropolitan areas around the country. And then, almost as if a switch had been flipped, crime dropped. From 1990 to 2009, homicide, robbery, and burglary in the big city fell an astounding 80%. So, what happened? Major metropolitan areas increased their police forces dramatically.
Let us roll up.
Let's stop here for a second. Did anything else happen, Hannah, between 1970 and the 90s that might have caused issues with crime and violence?
Just really racking my brain. Maybe the war on drugs. Just tossing that out there. No, I mean,
when did that launch exactly?
It was in the mid to early 1970s. I want to say 1974-ish, but don't quote me. Somewhere in there under Nixon. And the interesting thing here is that, so on top of that, a lot of things happened between the 1960s and 1970s. And so we did see crime really begin to uptick in the later 1960s. They were already starting to kind of move in that direction. But most criminologists actually believe that that had a lot to do with the breakdown in the family and the home. You started seeing a lot more divorce. You started seeing a lot more kids growing up in single-parent households. You also had the baby boom around that time that led to a real spike in the youth population, which, as I already mentioned, is who carries out the majority of crimes. And then there were other social factors. You know, society was changing, power structures were being challenged, people were having to learn to live together post the Civil Rights Act. There were just a lot of really changing norms that we think exacerbated crime during that time. But I think the war on drugs is definitely what you should mostly blame for the escalation in crime during the 1970s and 1980s.
But then they added more cops and everything got better, right? That's where he's going with this.
Up our sleeves to roll back this awful tide of violence and reduce crime in our country. I
always find it funny. It's like, you realize you're agreeing with Bill Clinton? Shouldn't that be a red flag for you?
Have the tools now. Let us get about the business of using them.
From 1994 to 2000, under the crime policy of President Bill Clinton and mirrored on state and local levels, America added 70,000 police officers. Similarly, across the country, authorities began increasing sentencing, instituting mandatory minimums, doing away with parole for multiple time offenses.
I want to pause because I want to address things as he goes. So, crime did fall precipitously in the late 1990s. It was a massive drop. I've looked into a lot of criminologists and dietitians' thoughts on this, and they don't really think that it can be entirely explained. But the things that they point to actually revolve around the increased economic prosperity that we felt during that time. It was a real uptick in how we were doing as a country. It was a relatively peaceful time for us. And I hate to say this because this is going to be a touchy subject, but a lot of them actually credit Roe v. Wade for this precipitous drop because Roe v. Wade, and this is Freakonomics, this is many dietitians, and this is widely cited, so I'm not saying this off the cuff. Basically what they said is that because Roe v. Wade was implemented in the 1970s, by the 1990s, the generation that would have been committing crimes as children, there were less of them. And particularly, there were less children who were not wanted in their homes, who did not have those kinds of family structures who were looking out for them, making sure they didn't get into crime. And so there's been a lot of work done around this that I think is a little bit difficult to debunk. It's very unpleasant, and that's by no means me advocating for abortion. I'm not. But that is something that has been pointed to that a lot of people think contributed pretty heavily to that drop in crime in that era. And then I would say that there were some smart things they were doing. They did a lot of really bad, tough on crime policies that actually weren't tough on crime. They were just tough on people and actually focused on crimes that were not violent, and then started letting a lot of violent crime go unsolved. But there were some smart things they did, and with that I would say targeted policing. That's still something that we advocate for within criminal justice, within the Smart on Crime movement. You know, most crime does not take place equally across the city. It is concentrated, so focusing police resources on actual violent crime and on targeted geographic locations, that does make sense. I also think to some extent what would be known as like the broken window policing of the time makes sense, because we know the number one deterrent to crime is the assuredness that you will be caught. And so if you apprehend people quickly and swiftly for even minor crimes, that lets them know that like bigger crimes will also be apprehended, and you can hopefully curtail worse crimes down the road. So I think all those things played a part. I do not think that there is any evidence to show that hiring a bunch of police is what led to this. And in fact, the Brennan Center, they found an only modest to downward effect on crime in the 1990s, likely 0 to 10% from increased hiring of police officers. So I just don't think that bears out. I think it's a very it's just an opinion that he seems to have. It's not really anything that presents itself in the data.
The crackdown on the crack epidemic meant more arrests. Prison populations soared, but crime declined dramatically. Contrary to popular opinion, the vast majority of arrests increases had nothing to do with drugs. As Barry Latzer writes, between 1990 and 1996, prison commitment ratios rose for violent crime except rape and declined for drug offenses by 25%. Mass incarceration, the left's favorite thing to hate, was responsible for the prevention of tens of thousands of crimes. In New York City, Mayor Rudy...
So, either I thought mass incarceration was a lie, but now it's responsible for reduction. We gotta get consistent here.
In New York City, Mayor Rudy Giuliani took over for failed leftist Mayor David Dinkins and promptly implemented James Q. Wilson's broken windows theory, policing of small crimes in order to demonstrate to criminals that larger crimes would not be tolerated. Giuliani and his police commissioner, Bill Bratton, implemented data-based policing designed to deploy resources to the highest crime areas. New York turned from a hellhole into a safe city once more.
So, I'm all good with a lot of what was just mentioned, the targeted policing, the broken window strategy, going to the communities where there's the most crime. That's great. But he kind of glossed over the fact that they also did stop and frisk, right? Where they just stopped and searched random adult men, often black men, but also all men mostly, and just searched them. No probable cause, no suspicion. And to me, you know, did it work on reducing crime or illegal gun carrying? I don't really know. Maybe. It doesn't really matter to me because, like, constitutionally, if you believe in freedom and privacy and limited government, the idea that police can just stop people on the street and search them with no warrant, no probable cause, nothing, to me that's just nuts, and that's wrong. It's immoral. It's a violation of due process and the Constitution, and that's not even getting into the racial element, just the very premise, right? So even if that was effective, it was still wrong.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. And I also just want to push back on a few other things he said. Mass incarceration did not lead to this drop in crime. In fact, the National Academy of Sciences looked at existing research and it found that on balance, higher incarceration rates had a modest effect on the decline. But they also cautioned that a lack of clear evidence means any benefits were unlikely to have been large. They said most offenders reach a point when they age out of criminal behavior, which we know, and that limiting the utility of mandatory minimum, and that limits the utility of mandatory minimum sentences. They also said some research even suggests that harsh prison conditions could make inmates more likely to reoffend, and meager gains shouldn't be invoked without reckoning with the losses incurred, which would be the loss of fathers in the home, the loss of workers in society, the loss of these people in our communities. That's pretty big. Secondarily, he tried to make it sound as if, like, drug arrests were not a big part of this picture. He's trying to make it seem like, oh, all of this is kind of warranted crimes we're arrested for, or we're arresting people for, but 1.16 million Americans are arrested annually for drug-related offenses. 244,000 Americans are sent to prison annually for drug-related crimes. 26% of all arrests are drug-related, and by itself, marijuana makes up 11% of total nationwide arrests. So I really just think that that's not a very genuine portrayal of what our system's doing.
The ACLU poll showed 81% of Democrats and 54% of Republicans wanted to release criminals from prison. Here is the reality. Crime rates increase when you let criminals out of prison. It is indeed
Not
that simple.
necessarily. Nope.
The Bureau of Justice
Not that
Statistics
simple.
followed over 400,000 prisoners in 30 states after they were released from prison in 2005. Here is what they found.
Oh my gosh.
Within 3 years, 67.8% were arrested again. Within 5 years, that number was 76.6%. Well over 80% of property offenders went back to crime, as did 76.9% of drug offenders and 71.3% of violent offenders. Just 16% of state prisoners were convicted for drug offenses, and most of those drug offenses involved distribution.
So on the recidivism thing, he's using stats from 2005 to say that criminal justice reform doesn't work, but that was before any of the criminal justice reform.
That took my breath away just now. I'm like, did this man just try to debunk criminal justice reform by citing statistics before the criminal justice reform movement launched? To be clear, Right on Crime, which was really the preeminent criminal justice reform organization that started on the right, and until that started, you didn't get criminal justice reform because Republicans wouldn't work on it with Democrats until this point. They launched in 2007 in Texas. And within 5 years, and they specifically launched because of some of these issues, that recidivism rates were really high. And what they said were, you know what, there's all of these government barriers in the way of people reentering society that explain why they can't get jobs, they can't get driver's licenses, and they end up getting pushed back into crime. We need to come in and have smart on-crime reforms that get rid of these government barriers so that these people can reenter society and do it successfully. And so they went about trying to pass those things. And within about 5 years, in Texas alone, they saw an 11% drop in recidivism. Okay, within 5 years. And they did that in large part thanks to focusing on treatment-informed responses to violence and removing these kinds of government barriers. So he's absolutely wrong that a person getting out of jail will automatically recommit a crime. Sir, what?
Also, like, he's using evidence that we have really high recidivism rates under the status quo he's advocating for as evidence that reforms are bad. And I just, all right, let's see.
In practically everywhere we've done reforms, we've seen recidivism rates plummet. So he's just wrong.
State prisoners are in for simple drug possession. Most of those people pled down their original charges from drug trafficking. The left constantly claims that the crime problem in inner cities is due to the lack of male figures thanks to mass incarceration. President Obama particularly promoted the notion that America has engaged in some sort of mythical dragnet, sweeping up black and brown people into prisons.
And the effects of this mass incarceration ripple through families and communities, especially communities of color.
Disparities in racial composition of inmates does not mean racism. It generally means disparity in the rates at which members of different racial groups commit crimes. Today,
I actually think it's both. Right, I think that there are differences in what percentage people commit crimes in different communities. There's a lot of reasons for that, none of which are intrinsic to skin color. But yet there's also enforcement disparities, right? Like black people and white people use marijuana at about the same rates, but black people are much more likely to be arrested for it.
Mm-hmm. And wrongfully convicted for it. So, yeah, I think if you want to say black people commit more crimes, do they? Or are they more likely to be overly policed? Are they more likely to be arrested, charged, convicted, and wrongfully convicted? And both of those things, or all of those things,
I also think lower income people tend to commit more crimes, and there is a racial wealth gap. So it would make sense that the black community has higher rates of some crimes, even though there's nothing intrinsic to race that has to do with crime.
Importantly, violence is cyclical. Most people do not wake up and become violent overnight, but we do see that when you are when you're exposed to violence over and over and over again, when you know people who are murdered, when you see murder, when you see violence, when you are abused, that does make you more likely to then repeat those patterns as well. And so when you have some of these communities that have been harmed by violence and crime for decades, then yes, you will see more and more of that continue to spring up in those communities until the root cause of the problem is addressed.
The Lives Matter movement has been fully integrated into the Democratic Party apparatus.
This is Joe Biden. Black Lives Matter, period. I'm not afraid to say it.
But if Black Lives Matter, the best way to save them is to activate more police in high crime areas. Crime rates declined from 1990 to 2010 because more cops practiced more law enforcement in more high crime areas. In areas that remained high crime, the problem wasn't too many police officers, but too few. Jo Levy of the LA Times says in her book Ghetto Side that a shortage of cops leads to a surplus of death in inner cities. Quote, where the criminal justice system fails to respond vigorously to violent injury and death, homicide becomes endemic.
So that's a really interesting point, because our whole point as criminal justice reform people is that the criminal justice system and our police should be focused on violent crime, property, those kinds of things, not victimless crimes. And so, but maybe that's because they're being stretched too thin, because we have this sweeping policing that goes after people for all these victimless crimes.
Exactly.
Of America's violent crime wave, there were more than 50 victims of violent crime per 1,000 Americans. To put that in perspective, over the course of 2 decades, a majority of Americans would have been victimized by a violent crime. By 2014, however, violent victimization had dropped to below 25 victims of violent crime per 1,000 Americans, sliced virtually in half. Thanks to the tender mercies of politicians like Mayor Bill de Blasio, however, police officers have stopped actively policing in many areas of the country.
After the death of Eric Garner, everything was reevaluated. The entire police force was retrained to understand the implicit bias that we all carry with us, to ensure it would not interfere with their duty.
The result has been rising violent crime in America's most dangerous cities. This is one impact of the so-called Ferguson Effect, termed as such by the police chief in St. Louis in November 2014 in the aftermath of the Michael Brown killing.
The Ferguson Effect is the twin phenomenon of officers backing off of proactive policing and the resulting increase in crime.
With the police under political attack across the country and the White House celebrating the racist anti-cop BLM movement, crime rates began to climb. As the Washington Post detailed, the number of murders, rapes, assaults, and robberies were all up over the first 6 months of 2015. Overall, this represented the single largest homicide increase nationally in 25 years.
So, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but is it our fault if police stop doing their jobs?
I was going to say, police have wide latitude to decide where they put their resources, how they spend their time, and if they chose to pull back from policing in communities because they didn't like people calling for accountability and integrity in their work, I think that, again, points to the fact that policing needs to be radically restructured, and we need to get a hold of it because they're not serving us, they're not working for us, they're not doing their job. So I think, this video is speaking out of both sides of its mouth right now. It's trying to have this pro-police agenda, but in doing so, it's actually proving our point about the problems within the system and about, as a whole, the need for reform. So I don't think this tracks or carries a whole lot of water. I think it's funny that they say this police chief warned against this. Like, oh, a police chief was against accountability and reforms? I'm so shocked.
Next you're going to tell me teachers' unions are against school choice.
Right. But they're wrong about the Ferguson effect and that police chief's prediction coming true. The Ferguson effect theory was pioneered by an opinion writer who I don't have much respect for, named Heather McDonald, but she's the one they've shown in this video actually a few times. Most of who he's relying on in this video, the woman he keeps showing. But serious criminologists have examined this theory, if you will, and have a much more nuanced take on it. University of Missouri St. Louis criminologist Richard Rosenfeld, he concluded there is a stronger support for some version of the Ferguson effect hypothesis than its alternatives. He said the dominant interpretation of the Ferguson effect is that criticism of the police after the killings of unarmed black citizens causes the police to disengage from vigorous enforcement actions. And he explores an alternative version of the Ferguson effect in which long-standing grievances and discontent with policing in African-American communities are activated by controversial incidents of police violence, and then chronic discontent erupts into violence. And that's been backed up by the director of the Justice Program at the Brennan Center. They said that Rosenfeld's findings offer very similar conclusions to a report they issued. And that report found that homicide spikes were localized in only a few cities and pinned blame on community conditions, not a national pandemic. And then Rosenfeld also said that while some policing strategies have a demonstrated impact on crime, the research evidence has not suggested that the effect of policing changes could lead to the 50% increase in homicide seen in the cities that they were studying, even with the most effective policing strategies to prevent crime. So what the study suggests is that this may have been driven up by the homicide rate is more of a systemic breakdown in the community's trust in their institutions and in how they work with police than it is actually in what the Ferguson effect would blame. So I think this, again, points to problems within policing. When you don't trust the police, when you won't work with the police and you're in a high crime area, we see spikes in violent crime. When we come in and do things like Operation Ceasefire, which is a great program out of Boston, or we come in and we do things like trauma-informed responses with police like my old company did in Newark, we actually see these communities start to work with police better, start to cooperate, have more trust in them. We see incidents of police brutality go down, and we actually see clearance rates increase and violence get better.
On October 23, 2015, FBI Director James Comey finally acknowledged the obvious. The left's takeover of America's major cities, combined with the federal crackdown on police forces, had led to a skyrocketing crime rate.
I spoke to officers privately in one big city precinct who described being surrounded by young people with mobile phones held high, taunting them when they get out of their cars. They said to me, "We feel under siege and we don't feel much like getting out of our cars."
That's your job, though?
Let's be clear.
Stop being snowflakes.
Far more people of color are being killed in American cities this year. And it's not the cops doing the killing.
Sometimes it is, though.
It is somewhat the cops doing the killing, actually. I've got good data on that. The FBI, actually, this is kind of shocking. The FBI, we don't have a national centralized system for tracking data on the use of force by police officers, which is just ghastly. The only use of force data the FBI actually covers is the percentage of agencies that send data, not the actual use of force by police across the country. So they can kind of voluntarily decide if they want to self-report. But there is a nonprofit called Mapping Police Violence, and that's a team of researchers who've been working to collect and analyze data on this since about 2013. And they show that from 2013 to 2020, police in the U.S. have killed more than 9,000 people at an average of about 1,095 per year. Up to May 17, 2021, there were more police killings than days in the year. And they also found that... Go ahead.
Those killings are, that includes both justified
Yes.
and unjustified police killings, right?
Well, and they're never examined. So who's to say what percentage of those are justified or not justified? Because as they go on to point out, criminal prosecution for police violence remains incredibly rare. At no point over the past 5 years has the rate of criminal charges being filed for police killings exceeded 2% of cases. In 2021, they said was on pace to have one of the lowest rates of prosecution. So it's very, very rare to even see any scrutiny, at least public scrutiny applied. Like, I guess they do their own internal reviews, but, you know, I don't put much weight in that. If cops say that was justified killing, like, was it? Was it? I don't know. So we really
I think
just
we
don't
only
have
see,
answers.
it seems like we only see accountability in the cases that get huge public outcry, like George
Right.
Floyd, Breonna Taylor. But what about the ones that don't? I don't know.
And also those are the ones where usually bystanders just happen to be recording, and then we get scrutiny.
Yeah,
But for
he
all
said the
the
officers
instances-
don't like being recorded. Well, if
Get
you're not
over
doing
it.
anything wrong, the video may actually vindicate you. So
Yeah, you're a good
I think
cop,
they
you
should have
should
to wear
love
body
videos.
cams.
100%.
Cities have been turned into crime centers. That's why de Blasio is gone and Eric Adams is the new mayor of New York.
I have the backs of my police officers.
That's why Democrats went from cheering defund the police to cheering fund the police at the last State of the Union address.
The answer is not to defund the police.
Biden
It's
was
almost
never
like it was
for
always
defund
just
the
a
police.
political slogan.
Also, Biden has been one of the biggest, like, cop drug war
The
types
simple
of
fact
all
of the
time.
matter is, when you release criminals from prison, they go and commit new crimes. When you stop the police from policing, criminals go and commit many more crimes. When you stand against the ability to enforce the law enforcement withers, and more crime is committed. Criminal justice reform is predicated on a lie, that cops are out to get innocent people, and that the only way for society to flourish is to stop the cops. The reality is that the only way for society to flourish is to stop the criminals.
Whew, what a straw man there at the end. I mean,
Yeah, look, I mean, my ultimate conclusion, and we've already said a lot about this, is just that this is a kind of a straw man that doesn't really engage with the substance of what criminal justice reform is in practice. I mean, the things that are criminal justice reform today that come to mind are not about going easy on violent criminals. They're reducing the disparities in drug charges between crack and cocaine. They're rolling back civil asset forfeiture where police can steal from you. They're about reforming qualified immunity so clear-cut cases of police abuse can have their day in court. It's like, we're talking about, no one's saying let violent people off the hook. I mean, maybe some crazy radical progressive somewhere, but it's like, I just don't think he really engaged with the substantive center-right criminal justice reform platform or movement in any meaningful way. He just showed a bunch of videos of horrible violent crimes that everyone opposes and then said that, look, it's criminal justice reform.
yeah, this definitely felt very boomerish and also just very removed from actual serious policy debate. You know, I'd love to hear him actually get in the weeds. He did not do that. He was disingenuous with how he pulled his numbers and tried to compile things, and I think that's really disappointing because I really think, honestly, if he sat down and intellectually looked at what's happening in the criminal justice reform movement, specifically within the right, who has largely been the people advancing this movement for the past 10, 15 years, it's really smart stuff. It actually changes families, it changes lives, it saves money, it conserves resources, it makes sure that we actually spend our time and energy preventing and solving violent crime and making people safer. I always say, like, when I was lobbying on these issues, a lot of politicians would say, "You're the best lobbyist I ever heard," and I'd say, I'm good, but it's actually just that every argument's on my side when it comes to this stuff. There's really no good argument against it. The way we've done things for, the 20 years before criminal justice kicked off, like, it was failing, and it was breaking our communities, and it was breaking our banks, and it wasn't actually making us safer. So it was a long time that we had started this movement, and I'm really glad to see that the vast majority of the right, and certainly the younger portion of the right, are not only on board with criminal justice reform, it's like a make or break issue for them. They are not supporting people who are just so, old school and out of touch with the realities around them.
Yeah, they don't hate the police, they don't want to defund the police,
No.
but they also don't want to do the drug war, and they think the police should be accountable, and they support all these reasonable reforms that people like you and I talk about. So, as far as I'm concerned, Debunked with Ben Shapiro just got debunked. But in all seriousness, folks, let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with Ben? Do you agree with us? And we'll keep this conversation going and keep talking about this. And like, comment, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. And we will see you all in the next video.